What's good, everyone, and welcome back to another reaction video. Today we are acting to... Oh, wow, that sounded like a bunch of mumble-jumble words. But today we are acting to small mistakes with huge consequences. Considering all the previous stuff, I just think this is going to be really bad. This is a 30-minute video that I'm going to react to, so it's best to start right away. So I'm going to cut to the chase. If you enjoyed this reaction video, hit the like button down below. Hit the subscribe button to support the channel, support the content provided, and so on and so forth. Hit the notification button, be notified immediately when the video comes out. And, if you have any videos you want me to react to, leave it down in the comment section below, and I'll react to it as soon as possible. You have my word on that. And finally, the link to this video will be down in the description below. So, yeah. If you want to see this video yourself, and you want to make sure all the facts are true, as well as giving some love and support for the creator of this video that I'm reacting to, be sure to check out the original video. But yeah, that said, let's start this mess, because these mistakes are probably going to give me a headache.
We'll make mistakes. Maybe you forgot an important meeting. Maybe you
True.
accidentally called your teacher mom. Maybe you hit the wrong button and uploaded your yoga routine to your 11 million subscribers instead of another amazing fact video before quickly deleting it. Okay, well, however
Never did that,
but you can rest easy knowing it wasn't that bad. Not compared with hitting a switch which plunged an entire city into chaos, or not tightening one single bolt and leading to a cataclysmic meltdown. So,
I'm sorry.
Feel better about yourself as we take a look at some tiny mistakes that had huge consequences. I declare a riot.
Oh no.
Everybody hates a blackout. No TV, no internet, no light for several hours. Ugh. Yeah, they're inconvenient, but nothing compared to the most legendary blackout of all time. On July 13th, 1977, 3 lightning bolts struck New York's Con Edison facility. In an instant, New York City and Westchester County were plunged into darkness. The operator had some 15 minutes to restore power and get the facility back up and running. A decent time window, right?
Yeah.
To do that, that operator needed to flip a series of switches in the right order. Unfortunately for the people of New York, that unnamed operator messed up. They missed a switch, and as a result, the city was dark and powerless for 25 hours. Still, the people of New York are known for being reasonable, calm, and collected, so... No, of course they're not. They immediately descended into the largest riot the city had ever seen. Stores were looted, public infrastructure was vandalized, cars were burned. The city was consumed by chaos. It resulted in 1,000 fires, 1,600 lootings, and 3,700 arrests. It's estimated that one missed switch cost the city nearly $300 million in damages. However, there was another unexpected consequence of the blackout, the birth of mainstream hip-hop music. Professional mixing and music gear is expensive, and at the time, they were incredibly upmarket products. After this equipment was stolen, it was hot, meaning the police were eager to retrieve it. This forced looters to sell the equipment quickly and at huge discounts. Most of those buyers were poorer inner-city New Yorkers who would otherwise struggle to afford it. A new generations of musicians in New York suddenly had access to the equipment they needed to make the music they wanted. And hip-hop went from a niche genre to a nationwide phenomenon in a matter of years. Maybe if they'd flipped a different switch, we'd have seen my dream of techno-country become reality. Was the blackout worth it to eventually get run DMC?
Techno-country?
In the comments below.
No.
And be sure to like and subscribe for more amazing content.
I would prefer hip-hop than techno-country. I prefer regular country.
When parents hold gender reveal parties to their unborn babies, does anyone besides them actually care? What, am I gonna stop being friends with you if you have a girl? Well, stupid as I think they are, at least they're not dangerous. That is, they weren't before September 5th, 2020, when Angela and
Oh no.
Refugio Jimenez got a little bombastic with theirs. They hosted a get-together in the woods near their home of El Dorado, California. They decided to make the reveal special with a few pyrotechnics. It seems they both had baby brain, though, because fireworks and dry forests in the summer just weren't it,
Oh.
especially considering September 2020 was 20 degrees hotter than previous summers. A dramatically timed smoke bomb ended up lighting a branch on fire, which lit another branch on fire, and another. Let's just say things spiraled out of control
Is that
fast.
why there was a
The
huge
fire spread through
wildfire
the dry woods
nearby?
quickly, and soon nearby houses and buildings were
Oh
blazing.
wait.
The harsh, dry summer had made the fire hard to combat, and it raged for an
That
unprecedented
might not have been me.
23 days. During this time, families evacuated their homes, roads were closed due to smoke, and many businesses couldn't operate.
Okay,
By the
yeah, I
time the
heard that
fire
on the news. I
subsided,
heard there was a
it had
giant
flamed
wildfire, but
23,000 acres of land,
dang.
15
I didn't know it
businesses,
was
5
that
homes,
bad.
and the life of one firefighter. The inferno caused an
Ooh.
estimated $40 million in damages, and at the end of it all, the Jimenez family were charged with 30 crimes. The name and sex of the baby were never revealed to the public when it was born. If it's a boy, I hope they called him Bernie. It can be hard to believe fireworks could ever cause so much damage, but even if they don't set a
Obviously
forest
they
on
can.
fire, they're still dangerous. Don't believe me? Check this out.
Okay.
What you're looking at there is the aftermath of another tiny mistake. An employee at a fireworks factory in Seest, Denmark,
No.
slipped while carrying a box of fireworks. The precise
No.
fall caused them to shoot off in all directions, which then caused
Oh.
more fireworks to blast off, creating a dazzlingly destructive display. The accident damaged over 2,100 homes,
Oh.
even rendering 176 of them totally uninhabitable. 2,000 people had to be evacuated, dozens were injured, and around 100 million euros worth of damage was caused. That's it.
When
From now on, I'm being extra careful. I'm only setting off fireworks in the microwave, where it's safe.
you'd be an
No
idiot if you
time to
did
nap.
that.
Spies. We love them. In the movies, they're
True.
suave, deadly, and have the coolest gadgets. But I hate to break it to you, they're not perfect.
That
This is Heinrich Albert, and during World War I, he was the paymaster for German spies operating in the United States. He made sure these spies were paid on time, had the right supplies for missions, along with whatever documents they needed. So he was an important guy. By
okay.
1915, America wasn't officially in the war yet, but they were providing European allies with munitions and supplies. Germany thought this was nicht gut, so set up an enormous spy network, sabotaging America's production lines, bribing officials, and causing all sorts of trouble. One day, Albert stepped onto a train in Harlem, New York, sat down, and after a while fell asleep. Now, look, when you get to a certain age, needing the odd power nap is understandable. What's less understandable, however, is falling asleep on a train right next to your briefcase containing the names, locations, and the missions of every spy in the country. Albert groggily woke and got off the train before realizing he didn't have his briefcase. He ran back on, but it wasn't there. It had already been swiped by the American Secret Service agents who were on his tail. A terrified Albert put an ad out in the Evening Telegraph offering $20 for the return of the briefcase. But the U.S. government wasn't that strapped for cash. The U.S. now had evidence proving Germany's sabotage, which they used to send all German ambassadors and diplomats back to Germany. This left all Germany's spies in the dark, with no idea where to go or what to do. The White House then leaked this news to the press, humiliating Germany and making them look weak on the world stage. The U.S. eventually entered the war in 1917, and while this wasn't entirely Albert's fault, it was a scandal that shocked many Americans out of their formerly passive stance on the war. So remember, no matter how bad you might feel,
Yeah.
You never accidentally tipped the scales of a world war.
I don't know if
Another
that was a
story.
good thing or a bad thing.
Most of human history, flight was a
I mean,
beautiful and unattainable dream.
we
Today,
stopped
it's
spies,
more,
but at the same time,
cramped
we got
affair
a
that
part of a war.
somehow always seats you between two crying babies. Still, it was
Not
exciting
really.
for a while.
There was
In
usually the
1950,
grumpy
there was
people, and
nothing
then
more
there was the
exciting than
Karens
de
on the
Havilland's
plane.
new Comet plane. It was the
Oh,
world's
those
first
were
commercial
nightmares.
airliner, boasting a futuristic design powered by 4 awesome-sounding Ghost turbojet engines. Its 1949 test flight went smoothly, and in 1952, the sleek new plane began carrying passengers around the world. Only a year
Okay.
after its launch, however, tragedy struck. One crashed. This was incredibly unlucky for de Havilland. In the 1950s, U.S. airlines experienced around half a dozen crashes per year.
Oh,
Considering there were thousands of flights per year, though, this was just extremely unfortunate. But then another broke up in the air, and another. Within 2 years, 3 comets crashed, resulting in the loss of 89 lives. 3 crashes in 2 years was beyond bad luck. Something was up. And after several inquiries, an unlikely culprit was found. Look at this picture of the comet next to a modern Airbus. Notice any difference? Here, let's zoom in. It's the windows. Notice how the Airbus windows have rounded corners, whereas the Comet has hard, angled corners? In vehicular engineering, a square corner, or angle, is considered a stress amplifier. When you apply pressure to an object, it's most likely to break around a stress amplifier like that. Think of a Toblerone. The hard angles where the corners meet is always where you break it apart. The square-cornered windows around the Comet's fuselage were
understandable.
particularly vulnerable to pressure. They
Oh,
50 miles per hour.
is that why
After a few
airplanes'
journeys,
windows
those
are more
square windows gave
round?
out, where round ones would have remained strong. It's sad to think about, but this one aesthetic design decision ended up costing many people their lives. De Havilland
I never knew that.
immediately redesigned their planes, and no airplane has featured square windows since. Today, the final Comet has been decommissioned and moved to an air hangar which acts as a museum. Let's just hope that hangar doesn't have square windows, or it'll never fly. Screws loose.
True.
The dream of space travel
Wait,
has always
screws
been an idea
loose.
that unites all humanity.
Please don't tell me
One
that
day,
was the hint
together,
from the
we
beginning
may
where
make the impossible
he was
possible.
mentioning that someone
Nah,
messed up
just
the
kidding. It's
screwing
about showing
thing.
off. Throughout the 50s and 60s, the USSR and USA were competing to see who could get to the moon first. Because, as any YouTube comment section will tell you, first is always best. The Soviets were the first to launch a satellite into space with Sputnik on October of 1957, and became the first to launch a living creature into space.
Oh,
Rest
no.
in peace, Laika. You were a real one. As years dragged on, though,
I thought that was
Americans
kind of
began to
cruel,
catch
sending a
up.
dog
In
into space.
1962, they announced their plans for the Saturn
That made me really
V,
sad when I heard
which they
that.
believed would take a man to the moon. Not wanting to be
What, like,
outdone, the Soviets quickly began working on their ambitious N-1 rocket with a similar goal. It was neck and neck until July 3rd, 1969, when the N-1 gloriously launched, before it very, very ungloriously came crashing back down to Earth. The event was a tragedy, claiming the lives of the cosmonauts on board and crushing Soviet spirits. At the time, the N-1 fireball was the largest man-made explosion ever besides the atomic bomb. The disaster set the USSR back years, both economically and on the world stage. To make matters worse, America's Saturn V launched without a hitch 13 days later on July 16, 1969. America landed a man on the moon, and that was history. But it almost wasn't. You see, this catastrophic, history-altering explosion was caused by one loose bolt. It turns out that not long after launch, a properly fastened bolt on the N-1 was sucked into a fuel pump. There, it ricocheted around at high speed, disrupting fuel flow and sparking one huge fireball. If not for that one tiny oversight, we may have seen a Soviet flag frozen forever on the moon. Kids, check your work. Titanic blunder.
Hmm.
We all
Wait,
know
the
the story of the
Titanic?
Titanic, the supposedly unsinkable cruise ship that sailed into the Atlantic, hit an iceberg, and sank in the icy waters, costing some 1,500 people their lives. Over the decades, the
Yeah.
exact cause of the disaster has been picked apart, especially by James Cameron, and the finger of blame often points towards one man, Fred Fleet. He was the
Fred
lookout on board the
Fleet?
Titanic, and it was his job to spot obstacles in the water. So he must have been pretty crummy not to notice the enormous iceberg, right? Well, like many stories from the Titanic, it's more complex and tragic than it initially seems. Shortly before the Titanic departed, higher-up cruise executives decided they wanted esteemed seaman Henry Wilde on the crew. Wilde was experienced, so when he was placed on
Okay.
the crew list, other crew members were moved down in rank to make way for him. That's where David Blair comes into play. While Mr. Blair
David
was also an
Blair?
experienced seaman, his presence wasn't requested like Mr. Wilde. It was thought that moving Blair down a rank would be insulting to him, so he was instead removed from the voyage. After all, he wouldn't be necessary with Wilde on board. This is where a minor but incredibly tragic accident occurred. You see, when Blair left, he forgot to hand over something small but very important to his replacement, a key. This little key belonged to a vital locker in the crow's nest of the ship. Now, what did this locker contain? Fred Fleet's binoculars. After this
Oh.
unfortunate series of mishaps, Fleet couldn't access his binoculars on the night of the incident. This meant he was unable to see much of the surrounding ship, and couldn't spot the iceberg until it was too late. Fleet would survive the incident, but was racked with guilt for the rest of his life. He testified in the Senate that if he'd had his binoculars, he's certain he could have prevented the disaster. The key was later found and sold at auction in 2007 for £90,000, some $200,000 today. Although, at one point, technically, it would have been priceless. Quick sig break.
Wait, so the whole thing with the Titanic could have been prevented if the guy had his key to his binoculars. That and this was due to someone being forced to leave. What the frick? That's awful. So many people died just because they didn't have one key? Oh. 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 That actually makes me want to not get on a boat anymore. Or any kind of ship at all. Oh.
This next story is important because it deals with the dangers of smoking. No, I don't mean ruining your lungs, developing an addiction, or causing yourself debilitating health issues. I mean
That is very
property
important.
damage. Sheesh. Our tale begins in
Oh,
Georgia, in the
that
incredibly
part.
easy
Yeah,
to
that's
pronounce
true.
village of Novobodanivka. See?
Please don't say someone actually dropped their
Right.
cigarette into the ground and
While
caused
the
a
town
fire.
itself was a rather small and humble place, it was keeping an important secret. Nestled in the scenic hills of Novobodanivka was a munitions warehouse that
Oh no.
stored 92,000 tons of explosive material.
I can already
This
guess.
included weapons, munitions, and explosives that the country had little use for. They had been stockpiling it after
What?
the fall of the Soviet Union in the 90s. Still, the munitions were valuable, and guards were installed to watch the depot. The thing is, working
And
in
this
a
is that
dreary
part, isn't
gray
it?
building for hours and hours at a time can get boring. So, they did what all listless Europeans do to kill time: smoke. And what happened next isn't entirely
I
clear,
can.
but one account posits that a guard crammed a dirty Burger King wrapper in the smoking area's trash can. As soldiers put their cigarettes out in the designated ashtray, the smoking area began to stink. So the guards decided to move out of the designated smoking area and closer to the weapons depot.
Oh,
For whatever
an
reason,
idiot.
they were there. One guard dropped or flicked an errant cigarette, and catastrophe. Unsurprisingly, if you pile up a bunch of explosives on top of each other, it's really hard to just set one of them off. One explosion led to another, which lit fires, which led to even more explosives going off.
Oh.
The slow and steady chain of explosions made it impossible to safely deal with the disaster. In total, the explosions lasted for 8 straight days, and the effects were felt across an area of over 150 square miles. Several people lost their lives, many were injured, and 35 people had to be evacuated. Ultimately, the incident caused $450 million worth of damage. Several years later, Ukraine would suffer another catastrophic fire in a weapons depot in Balakleya. While this one isn't confirmed to be the fault of smokers, I wouldn't be surprised if it were. The off-light.
That's
Have you ever been confounded
awful.
by a poor design decision? Like a pull door with no handle, or an unreachable outlet? Well, it could be worse. At least those design blunders didn't cause a nuclear meltdown. On March 28, 1979, the unassuming little rock of 3 Mile Island near Middleton, Pennsylvania, had a problem. You see, this unassuming little rock housed a nuclear reactor that was on the verge of overheating. A mechanical failure was preventing pumps from sending water to the plant's steam generators, which removed heat from the reactor's core. Luckily, there was an incredibly simple solution: closing a valve. Once closed, this valve would act as an emergency stopgap, keeping the reactor from overheating. And it could be activated by just hitting a button. So what was the problem? Poor design. You see, there was a little
Okay,
light above
what
the
is it this
valve
time?
indicating its status. Everyone at the power plant reasonably assumed that once the switch was hit and the light above the valve flicked on, it meant the valve was closed and crisis averted. Not so. Instead, the light only indicated that the button had been hit, not that the valve had actually closed. This meant workers were breathing a sigh of relief when they should have been soiling themselves. Had anyone at the plant known this, they would have attempted another solution or pressed the button way earlier. As they didn't know what the light meant, the plant overheated and went into meltdown. The incident is still considered the worst nuclear accident in U.S. history, forcing thousands to evacuate their homes, causing severe damage to the plant and surrounding environment, but luckily only having minor effects on the workers. Cleanup would take 12 years and $973 million, all because someone thought a light indicated something might happen was a good idea. Shaky
That
ground.
doesn't sound like a good idea overall.
2,200 years
When you think
ago,
about it,
ancient
a blinking
Rome
light
was
is
squaring
probably
off
a bad
against the
thing.
toughest adversary they'd ever faced, the North African kingdom of Carthage. What made Carthage so terrifying was the leadership of their great general, one of history's baddest ever mofos, Hannibal Barca. Hannibal won several huge victories against Rome, including the Battle of Cannae, which is still seen as one of the most strategically impressive victories in history, as well as one of Rome's greatest defeats. Rome was so scared of Carthage that some politicians
hear
would
the problem
end
here.
every speech with the phrase, "Carthage must be destroyed," even if they were talking about something else. And eventually, its army was. So, why didn't Hannibal win? It's a great historical mystery. The predominant theory is that despite his victories, Hannibal's supplies and men were too few for him to assault Rome's capital. This allowed Rome time to regroup and eventually win the war. Why was Hannibal running on empty, though? Well, during the war, Hannibal decided to cross the Alps with his army. This was a miserable, insane trek, especially considering he had live elephants in tow. One occasion, that to
Oh.
inspire his men to march on, Hannibal decided to give a rousing speech. He ended it by dramatically striking his cane into the snow, which triggered a massive avalanche that buried 1/3 of his army alive. Some accounts say as many as 18,000 men and elephants were wiped out instantly. If true, this sudden loss would explain why Hannibal didn't have the manpower to seize Rome. When Rome emerged victorious, it sealed their status as the predominant superpower of the classical era. If Carthage had
Oh.
won, the world would look very different. Many languages would be
True.
based on Phoenician rather than Latin, meaning our alphabet would look like this, and we'd be using words like kitty? Is that how you pronounce that? Lip? Key? Huh? Without Rome, there'd also be no Holy Roman Empire, and probably no Christianity either, as there'd be no Roman occupation of Jerusalem. It's hard to even
That's
imagine, isn't it?
true.
All this because Grandpa needed to make a dramatic point. Hanshin Impact. 1995 was a big year. Windows released an operating system.
The name is
for the World
a bit funny,
platform,
considering
Mike
that
Jordan
there's a
made his triumphant
game
return to
actually
basketball, and somehow a movie
similar
about
to that.
shooting gorillas with diamond-powered lasers was a
Yeah,
hit.
you get what
In
I'm
Japan,
talking about.
however,
There's a
this
game
year
that's
is
actually
remembered for a
closely
single
similar to
catastrophic event: the Hanshin earthquake. This monstrous
the
7.3
Launching
magnitude quake
Impact.
occurred early on January
And
17th.
actually, I think there's two,
In addition to
but
claiming
that's
between
still pretty funny.
5.5 and 6.5 thousand lives,
Not the
caused a
tragedy that
mind-boggling
that
$200 billion
the
worth of
namesake.
damage. As unavoidable as much of this destruction was, there
Uh,
was one area where things didn't
and
have to go as badly as they did, and that was along the Kobe route. This is the main link between the city of Kobe and Osaka, which housed the mighty Hanshin Expressway. Constructed in 1966, the network was supposed to be able to withstand an earthquake's tremors, but that didn't happen, and the bridge collapsed. Why? A post-mortem on the bridge suggests it had improper hoop anchorage, along with insufficient shear capacity. To put simply, anchorage refers to the means by which structures are connected to concrete, while shear capacity refers to a structure's ability to resist sliding against itself. While either of these oversights are bad on their own, in a structure supposedly designed to withstand earthquakes, they made for an especially terrible combo. In the 20 short seconds the earthquake lasted, the bridge buckled and collapsed. It was so utterly decimated that it needed to be completely rebuilt at the cost of $4.6 billion. As you can see, when it comes to civic engineering, everything must be perfect, and it has to be regularly maintained to stay perfect.
True.
This football stadium in Vitesse in the Netherlands, for example. Fans were cheering and stomping along after a victory in 2021 when this happened. By some miracle, there were no reports of any injuries. While the fans laughed it off, Mayor Hubert Bruls failed to see the humor, knowing the situation could have been much worse. A formal inquiry didn't reveal a single cause, but did reveal the structure had been built in the 1930s with almost no maintenance between then and the incident. And if you're an American laughing it up at the silly European and Japanese infrastructure,
No.
get ready for a rude awakening, because by some calculations, as much as 25% of U.S. infrastructure is at risk of becoming inoperable, with disastrous consequences. Just check out this Metrodome collapse from 2010.
Oh.
Jeez, what you just saw was a hefty amount of snow break through that roof. This Minnesota Stadium's roof featured an exterior layer of Teflon-coated fiberglass, with an inner layer of fabric acting as the structure's ceiling.
That
The roof
doesn't
itself
sound like
was
a good
sturdy,
idea to use
weighing
that.
in at a hefty 580,000 pounds. The problem was an oversight in the material. You see, even a small hole in a weak fabric can become a big deal if enough pressure is applied to it. And all that snow applied a lot of pressure. Like a torn bedsheet, the tiny holes in the fabric grew and grew under the weight of the snow before the whole thing collapsed. Imagine if the team had been practicing. They'd have become skiers. Let's learn from examples like Hanshin, Minnesota, and Vitesse. Check your work, and then check it again every few
Alright.
years. Sweep the legs. Legs are
What?
great. They let you walk
Sweep the
around,
legs.
open doors, and deliver roundhouse kicks to punks dissing your girl. Hi-ya. But you know what
Yeah,
legs aren't good
that
for?
sounds actually very
Buildings.
cool.
Buildings don't need to walk around or deliver roundhouse kicks. Well, in 1977, Citicorp
True.
unveiled their fancy new building, known at the time as the Citicorp Center. While it boasted a sleek, modern design
looks
with
nice.
an angled roof and a series of long, slender legs. This fancy
Oh.
look made the building the toast of New York upon construction.
Okay.
That fabulous design gave the building a glaring weakness, however: wind. You see, it gets windy 918 feet up in the air because there's nothing to impose any air resistance, like trees or other buildings. Architecture student Diane Hartley realized that the unique shape of the building made it particularly susceptible to harsh winds, which could wreck its structural integrity. Diane contacted the building's designer, William Lemoussier, with her discovery. William realized his mistake. While he had accounted for strong winds on the building's faces, he hadn't thought about the effects on its corners. Doing some frantic research, William realized that a storm strong enough to topple the building occurred roughly once every 55 years. Worse still, its legs meant if it did fall, it wouldn't collapse inwards, but topple onto other buildings, causing more destruction. Sounds bad, right? It gets worse, because Diane and William discovered this fact right before Hurricane Ella was set to hit New York. Williams sprang into action. He created an evacuation plan with the NYPD and made sure there were 2,500 Red Cross members on standby. He and a team of engineers worked around the clock for 3 months straight to devise a solution. Working covertly to avoid creating hysteria, engineers welded 2-inch thick steel plates over the building's bolts, increasing its resilience. They worked so secretly that residents of the building didn't even notice them. Thanks to Diane's deduction, Williams' conviction to fix his mistake, and the hard work of those engineers, the crisis was averted. All without making headlines. In fact, the only reason this was uncovered at all was because an engineer blabbed about it at a party years later. Hey, I get it. It's a heck of a brag. While the huge consequence of this tiny mistake was avoided, I figure we could end on a lighter note. Sue me. Well, those were some terrifyingly consequential mistakes, huh?
Well,
what's the worst tiny mistake you've ever made?
Oh my gosh.
In the comments below.
So a tiny mistake that was fixed. Okay, I actually like that one. Because the image of the building collapsing and hitting other buildings was nightmare fuel. Holy cow. Okay. The last consequence wasn't really a bad one. Because they went ahead, fixed the mistake, acknowledged the mistake, and tried their best to make sure it doesn't happen. So, they try to fix the mistake. Can't call that a bad one. But the fact that they left it alone for so long was crazy itself, and it's unbelievable. Now, onto the other stuff, though. Let's see. The riot thing, I have to say that was pretty bad. No matter how much someone would like to say otherwise, it was a bad thing that happened. I mean, basically, a riot happened in New York, and there was tons and tons of problems there. It's bad, but it's not the worst. I'll admit. It's not the worst one. This, on the other hand, the fire caused by fireworks, that was pretty bad. Like, I would say as bad as the riot, because a lot of homes was burned down, and if the fire was not put to rest, then bam, it would continue being worse. But I'd say the fire and the riot were probably even. Now, the next thing would be this. It's less bad than the other stuff, but I mean, it's less bad than the other two. Honestly, it's not bad. I mean, it caused a ton of problems, but it's not the worst thing that was so small that caused huge consequences. The spy thing, I don't know what to call this one. I mean, it was a mistake on the spy's part, but I don't know if the consequences were good for us or just bad. Because due to this information, we found out there were spies in America. But it also kind of ignited a light that made us go to war. With a valid reason. So I'm kinda iffy on this one. It's both good and bad. So I can't really say anything on that. Now, this was freaking awful. I wouldn't say it's the worst. I would say that the riot and fire are a little more worse than this, but I say this is like a close second with the two that are tied from this point on. And that's because no one really noticed the problem until they got a closer look. And that was due to the window design. Many people died. And no one really noticed the problem until they actually gave it a look. Actually, I think it might be as bad. But I say it's close enough. This consequence, yeah, it's pretty bad. I mean, look at this. The thing freaking exploded. And that's kind of awful, because the people inside pretty much, I believe, died. And yeah, I think this probably matches up with the plane. So a second tie, I guess, for close to being worse. But this was awful. This was the smallest mistake that made the biggest impact in all of history. And this was due to wanting to switch captains. I don't understand the whole procedure of how that worked, but this was freaked up. They had to get rid of someone. Someone who had the key and access to the binoculars that could have saved everyone. The Titanic wouldn't have hit the iceberg and fell into the sea. That is pretty fricked up. This actually is another thing I'm going to tie with when it comes to the riot and the forest fire, because that was freaking awful. This one, I think this one actually takes the cake. I mean, instead of handling the smell or going somewhere else besides where all the bombs are to take a smoke, they went ahead and went to where all the bombs was and took a smoke, and wasn't careful enough and caused so much damage. honestly, that was freaking dumb. And anyone around that radius died, probably. So honestly, this was a stupid mistake. I don't know the death toll because I don't know for sure, but this is pretty much tied with the others. Because if there was a massive death toll, this was a pretty bad mistake. The nuclear one, yeah, this one has to take the cake. I mean, nuclear radiation that affect the environment and probably people around it to a point that it was harmful, and due to not understanding the controls, that's a really bad mistake, and it probably has to take much. It's probably much worse than anything else, because nuclear radiation isn't something that technically disappears very easily. So, yeah, not a fan of that. This one's sheer stupidity. Oh yeah, nuclear radiation thing, one, top. This one's pretty bad. But not the worst. It's more due to ignorance. So I have to say it's like tied with the fireworks going off and all that. Because, yeah. The stupidity there is crazy. Now this design thing, it's horrifying to realize that something outdated that hasn't been checked could frick everything up. Because basically, if I go to a stadium and it hasn't been maintenance checked or had anything of such, and something breaks, there's a chance that many people could get injured and or killed. The subject this is on is so freaking bad in consequences that it just makes me kind of nervous when I go into places that haven't been maintenance-ly checked. Because the consequences there is very dire and it's horrifying. Because anyone in the world could experience that, and that would be terrible. Heck, we might not even be there, and the thing might just break when people start entering the place. Like shown right here. Snow fell. Imagine if someone was there when that happened. And it got worse. Honestly, that's horrifying. This would probably be the new number one, tied with nuclear radiation, because both sound pretty bad. But the last one, I wouldn't call it bad. I mean, it was a mistake, but they realized the mistake, they learned it, they understand it, they took responsibility for it, and went ahead and did their best to fix it. And that's something I gotta respect beyond anything here. But the consequences would have been really bad. But it didn't happen, so thankfully we had a good note here. And yeah. That's my intake of this. I said the nuclear radiation and the whole subject about things not having maintenance collapsing is pretty bad. Because the subject of the consequences of maintenance not being checked could have a lot of people killed. Where it happened, I wouldn't call it bad, but the subject of it happening repeatedly is something to be worried about. And that's why I'm calling it even with nuclear radiation, because it can just happen without us being aware of it. at least with the others, we can kind of guess what's going on and how it started and where it came from and all that. And we will be alerted if it happens. But this one, this would just be on the spot, and you could be dead or highly or very injured. There is no middle ground there. And that's horrifying. Oh my gosh. Just thinking of it gives me chills. Anyway, with all this said, I hope you enjoyed this reaction video. If you did, hit the like button down below, hit the subscribe button, support the channel, support the content provided, and so on and so forth. Hit the notification button, be notified immediately when your video comes out. And tell me what you think, and give me your personal opinion on what you think was the biggest, smallest mistake with the hugest consequence, in your personal opinion. I'd like to hear it. So, yeah, leave it down in the comment section below. Other than that, see you all next time. Bye.